3 stories from basement to attic is being basically held back behind these valves. If something were to rupture, I'd have a flood in my
I've got one that I think is pretty straightforward.
Mic check. Mic check.
Good evening. With your indulgence, we'll begin the third, our meeting this evening. Thank you for coming out. This is the third and last round of questions and concerns from the board with regard to the current budget. As an update, we had the opportunity to get information regarding where the budget was at our last Finance Committee meeting last week. And thanks to the good efforts of the staff, Barbara, your staff, that number is down to zero. We, as of Thursday anyways, had a balanced budget. So again, congratulate the staff and the hard work. I know it's, I know you guys are spending a lot of hours here and burning a lot of midnight oil and on the weekends, and it's always a tough time for the staff. And I think, again, what makes it a little easier, at least, is that we send out questions to the staff with regard to the concerns that we have during the different deliberation meetings, and it gives the staff a heads up to figure out what kinds of information we're looking for. And thanks to our staff, Kalia and Deborah, that information goes out in a timely manner, and the responses come back just as timely as well, and we thank you for that as well. You have in front of you some additions to the budget book, some further clarifications on the changes to the budget, information regarding positions and salaries and things like that, so please review that. I would suspect that we've got most of our questions already in, so tonight we're just basically going to clean up and see if there's any kinds of additional concerns that may have arisen recently. I also want to take the time to congratulate Commissioner Adams on the addition to her family. She's got a little grandbaby. All right. So, as anybody who's a grandparent knows, it's a blessing, right? When we have our children have children, and the feeling that gives us. Also the possibility that we can spoil them rotten and then send them home. So as a way of payback. So without further ado, I'd like to open it up to Everton to see if there's any kind of opening comments you want to make, and then we'll go down the row and ask questions, and we'll take it from there.
Just want to thank the board, each of the board members, President White, Vice President Elliott, and Chairperson of the Finance Committee, Commissioner Cruz, and the rest of the board for their diligence and their patience as we walk through each of the steps in the process. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for understanding as we explained, giving us the opportunity to walk through that. We also want to thank our superintendent, Barbara Dean Williams, for making sure that we get the support that we need to go through each and every one of these questions as we go through the budget process, introducing some new things to us that we embrace and make sure that we are putting out a budget that is meeting the requirements of the state as well as meeting the requirements of the students that we serve. And to all, budget individuals, Rodney, Assay, my budget director, and all the staff, Diane and everyone. So we're here now just to make sure that as we get into the final leg of the budget process, we have the teaching and learning staff who has been very diligent in providing answers for us, and the chief of staff, and just everyone who has done their endeavor best to make sure that we respond to your questions in a timely manner. And at this point in time, if there are any other questions as to the final leg, if you could just open that up, and we will get those addressed as best we can.
Mr. Chairman, so are these, help me to understand what process we're going to use. Is this just for the budget itself? Where will we, or when will we be able to ask questions about the capital budget?
I think the capital budget is on the agenda for this meeting as well.
I had a question regarding the one of the appendices that was in the round 3. It was the compensation appendix 3-3-15. In the past, the total compensation has included some additional items. The listing in the appendice was strictly salary. And in the past, there were some other categories, vacation cash-in, additional pay that was board authorized. Are those other categories still, are people still being compensated in those other categories? And if so, can that be updated with that total compensation?
Yes, they still get compensated for that, and we can include that. The thing is that what will happen is that the state requirement was that we include salaries for individuals making $132,000 this year and more. So what we had done in last year is that we had done that cutoff. In prior years, we would go to every single person and put that list together. So upon the request of the board, we had gone back and pulled that information. But I understand, where you're saying all the different pay types that we make to individuals, we will include those as well.
Okay, would you like me to submit that as a follow-up for the next round? Okay, thanks.
So if you're talking to me, you have to talk into your mic.
Going right down the line. Next.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Forgive me if you covered this in the Finance Committee last week. The last meeting, I recall our conversation about the charter school tuition. They said we believe that the state was going to be raising their reimbursement by $500 per pupil. And yet on the summary of major changes page, it's in front of us today, it just says as a result of state decision to keep charter school tuition frozen. Part of the balancing the budget processes was to subtract $15.9 million of charter school tuition expenditure. How does that fit with what you told us about the $500 per pupil?
So when we presented the draft budget, we made the assumption, conservatively, that the rate was going to be the new rate. So as the decision was made to only increase the rate by the $500, we went back and recalculated what the expenditure was going to be based upon that amount. So in addition to the change in the charter school, we also recalculated the number of students that we will be having in charter school. So the reduction that you're seeing of the almost $16 million is the difference between the $22.5 million I think we had in the budget and when we recalculated it, what that came out to be. So it's a combination of two pieces, and you're right. The $500 is included in the new number, and what we did was just see what the difference between what we had in the budget book and what the new number was supposed to be, and that's the $15.9 million.
Right, thank you. So that's the net.
Yes.
On the summary of FTE changes, the second to last column that's the adjusted after the approved state budget. Is that correct?
The column that says 2017-18,
And the EPM.
dated 4/19, and EPM is our budgeting system. So when we extract, we compare what the system says to what the actual draft budget says. So as we come here, if you see that term, it's our budgeting system. So we want to make sure that that is identified. And yes, that is after the governor's budget.
So the column, the third from the last column is 2017-18 draft budget, and some of these items, line items are blank. For example, homeschool instruction, English language learning. In the third to last column, it's blank. In the second to last column, it's 2.5 FTEs. And then you express some changes from draft. And these appear to be FTE. That particular one happens to be an FTE add, but others are FTE subtracts.
Yes.
Were these adds and subtracts part of that decision, the FTE decision-making that had to go into fitting into the governor, or the approved state revenue stream?
It's a combination of everything, because when we presented the draft budget, we had certain assumptions that we had put in. So this document, because you already had the budget book, this document is saying, here are some decisions that were made subsequent to the budget book. So we wanted to make sure that all the FTEs, whatever changes that were made from the budget book that was in front of the board, we capture those. One of the things I thought about today is to give another document that would say, here are the overall changes from this year to where the final budget is. But one of the things the board had requested and we wanted to make sure is that what has changed since the budget book was given to the board. So this document is capturing all those changes, because the board may have looked at a number where it was blank, but because of some action that were taken, the decision was made to add certain things back in the budget based upon certain actions. So you may see some of them blank as according to the draft, but then in the final, those items were added back in, or added.
And because this is an aggregate document, it's going to be very difficult to ask a question about a particular line and say, why did this change? Because it could have been any number of things, including reaction to the approved state budget.
Right, but if you also look at the department number, I highlighted that where the change actually took place. As to the justification as to why it happened, we could go back, because one of the things that we continue to do, and you've heard me say it before, that since the draft budget, we still have been meeting with principals to make sure that their schools were adequately funded. So from a result of that was that the chiefs came back with certain decisions that were made to say, when we did the draft budget, for example, we only allocated 2 counselors to a school. Based upon discussions with the principal, they believe that they need a 2.8. So the action from those decisions was to add the 0.8. Some other schools may have said, well, I don't need counselors. I would like to take a counselor and get social worker instead. So we make those changes based upon discussion with each of the principals. So we gather the input from the principals, and we made the changes as best we could in the budget.
Well, finally, I want to say, Everton, I think that you've become far more secure in your understanding of what's in the book and ability to articulate it, and I want to commend you for that right up front. I mean, everything you just said is very edifying, and any of us that have been sitting through previous budget cycles and previous conversations this year would appreciate that we had a lot of reacting to do, not just because decisions here were made after the draft was provided, but also because it was based on our best guess of state aid. The whole central office, I think, has done a commendable job working collaboratively. That's something that every superintendent says they're encouraging, but here I think we're seeing the evidence that it's actually happening. And for that, I want to congratulate Barbara D. Williams, yourself, all of the senior cabinet members that are part of that collaboration process. If you contributed to moving us into a win-win, then you deserve kudos and if the shoe fits. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams.
I have some programmatic questions, so it may involve other people. This is, I appreciate the spreadsheet of showing the changes in positions, but just by the nature of the way the data is presented, it's difficult for me to verify certain programmatic concerns I have. So I have two areas in missions that support the new code. So I would say those areas that I would want confirmation have to do with implementing the relationship model of intervention, the K through 2 curriculum overhaul, and some of these I know have specific position requirements or commitments attached to them. Restorative practices, and then in general, counselors and social workers, because I saw some net decreases in that. And I guess by implication, and maybe this is actually not visible on a position spreadsheet, the commitment to help zones and alternative to suspension, because that does typically involve contracting with community-based organizations. So relationship model, K through 2 curriculum, restorative practices, global coverage of social workers and counselors, and then the ability to continue help zones and AT, alternative to suspension. So can we verify that those are intact as previously understood?
Okay, I'm going to have the Deputy Superintendent, Dr. March.
Yes. You're doing one at a time.
Yep, I'm sorry. I know it's like a big thing. And I apologize because I might have been able to sort through some of the program codes and stuff, but I was in the hospital with my grade line. So the relationship model, to the extent that, and I realized, and maybe that one never really had a specific structure involving positions, maybe that was still to be determined. And if that's the case, and there's no whittling away, and it's still to be determined, that's good enough answer.
That is correct, and that'll be part of our professional development for 17-18. That is correct.
Okay. So it is still intended and
Yes.
worked on and developing?
That is correct.
Okay. And then K through 2 curriculum, 5 curriculum writers was the way we were going this year with efforts to expand next year?
We still have those 5 curriculum writers, as I think I shared last week. They are they are piloting in those schools as we speak, working with Dr. Goodwin and Dr. Schwartz, and we're going to continue that work, and I'm going to facilitate that and manage that personally.
No positions were cut?
No, ma'am.
Okay, great. And then restorative practices, especially I'm interested in the social workers that were, I understood that, I thought I had heard at one point 10 social workers from the My Brother's Keeper initiative. Is it really, was it 10 or?
So in our original grant proposal, we put in there for 10 FTEs to be allocated along with training and for parents and various other items in there. The state was very late in awarding the grant, so we were able to fill 5 of the 10 positions.
And is that intact for this coming year? So are 5 budgeted to go forward next year?
Yes, we talk about our restorative practice coaches.
Right. So
Yes.
there are 5 now, and there are 5 budgeted for, there's no impact here. Because I saw in the social work section, there were some that were like, it was hard to decipher. They were not connected with any school.
And those would be the restorative practice coaches that are doing the implementation.
Okay, because
What document are you?
we have a spreadsheet, and there's like 5 or 6 social work lines, and some of them are attached to schools, 39, 44, big picture. And then there's school counseling and social work, where it says no project, so I'm thinking that's some kind of central.
Yep, those would be the coaches.
Okay, so that went from 4 to 2.
That was an error, we caught that.
Oh,
Everton
good.
and I, yes, it should have been 4, that was an error, we did catch that.
As a matter of fact, right before this meeting, I was talking with Ruth Turner, and we were going back to see how that happened. And I just actually have it on my desk to fix it. That's why I came up a little bit late, because we went back and looked at all the social workers and some of the numbers that came in, and that was the one that
Okay.
we caught and said we need to fix that one.
Okay, and that kind of flows right into my next bullet point, which was counselors and social workers generally. So it looks like there's actually, if that is corrected, there might be just a single reduction in social worker, which probably would be connected to the big picture, because I'm seeing that being basically eliminated, right? Is big picture being eliminated for next year? I'll get that in the second round. Anyway, it looks like social work is not impacted too heavily, but counselors, it looks like there's a net decrease of 5.5.
In the document?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened with the draft budget is that we had put information in on some of the schools where the chiefs had made a decision that we would like to put counselors in these schools, but as they went back and did their meeting with their principals, certain decisions came back to say, well, I really don't, especially from some of the K6 school, they may not have gotten 1, they may have gotten like a 0.5. So those decisions came back in as we were balancing the budget and said we could take bits and pieces of these out.
So the bottom line is these are definitely done in collaboration with the principals, and there's no surprises here to leadership at schools. They're well aware.
Exactly,
Okay,
that is correct,
good.
because
We appreciate that. I know
everything-
that words of appreciation have been expressed by Willa and others, and I appreciate that too, that there's that, not that surprise, last minute finding things out and being, dismayed. So thank you for that. And then the last thing on my list here was help zones and alternative to suspension. Is that something that we're confident can be maintained forward in the secondary schools? Or wherever they've been this year, that they will at least continue?
Yes, our commitment has been to make sure that we have help zones in K-8 buildings and our secondary buildings. We are moving away from the ATS model, which was really a duplication of services. So the thinking is, if we're going to have a TA who's a district employee and then contract to have a Center for Youth person in the ATS room to provide social emotional learning, was why can't we train our own people to do that work and then eliminate the redundancy by having a second person there? So help zones will stay intact as we promised, but we will not continue with the ATS.
Thanks, that's good for me for now.
Now, how should I ask the questions for just the operating budget at this point, or?
Go ahead and ask any. This is the last round anyway, so you can ask anything.
Okay, all right. Well, first of all, let me just say, I don't know him. So has he been formally introduced to the board? So you probably want to if he's in a higher position?
He was introduced to our finance committee. Yes.
Okay, so I don't know him, so if he could just take a minute to say who he is and where he came from and being vice president and all, at least I need to know who people are.
That's fair, that's fair.
All right, my name is Rodney Assay. I'm currently the new Everton as director of budget. My background, I'm mostly in finance. I worked with the State Comptroller's Office for several years. Also was director of management and finance for BOCES before I came here. Also had some opportunity to work with our current superintendent in Greece. So any question you want to have,
Nope, just
we
wanted to
can
have
talk
the formal
after our meeting.
introduction because, you know, it's sort of like, if you remember, although I wasn't in finance, I don't know if you all saw the Bill Cosby, the Cosby Show, where Vanessa had brought in this guy that she was going to marry, but the family didn't know. And what he said was, you know, you like steak, how you like the steak and all that, right? And Cosby said, well, what if I gave you all of that on a garbage can top, right? So, you know, that's sort of how, you know, I didn't read it. So, and I think that's something that should have been probably done officially, particularly since he's in such a important position. But welcome. So, if I can go to the operating budget, there's a section here in terms of RSD salaries, and it says viewable online. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean?
Is it a question?
There's a insert for salaries, but it's saying viewable online. Salaries by name.
It's on board doc. So it's a 100-page document that we're going to print out this evening, but it's online. It lists all of the salaries by position and also by that.
Okay, so is that going to be available in hard copy at some point, or? Just for the public. I mean, I'm talking about not necessarily for us, but if we give out these binders to the public, I'm not sure if we do that anymore, but will that be available?
It will be in the budget book.
Okay.
I think because it's like a
Yeah,
lot of pages,
okay.
but it will be a
But
part of the
I
budget
appreciate the
book.
effort, though, because I know I requested that.
Yes, and
So, yep, thank you. But I'll go to the capital improvement program. Do you have a copy of that? So I'm looking on page 4 of my copy, or should I just sort of ask the question? You have
yes,
it?
we have the same copy.
Okay. So the district does not have any buildings that have dangerous conditions. I think I may have asked
Mike?
that, and I think he said that we did not have any, I guess there's criteria that the state offers that would say that we don't have any dangerous buildings.
Good evening. The answer to that question would be, yes, we do not have any buildings that we labeled dangerous by the state.
Okay. And then on page 5, where it says that, given the district's needs and the cost of renovations, the current proposed capital spending is insufficient to ensure that the district has the reliable, technically advanced facilities to serve the next generation of students. Can you all respond to that statement, please?
So the building condition survey by which we designate the amount of required maintenance that needs to be done on particular buildings is done every 5 years. In order for us to access capital funds, that survey needs to be done. It's done by an independent person or independent group. That survey's targeted on or around $500 million of required maintenance that would need to be done on our inventory of buildings. Our annual CIP allocation that we utilize for that maintenance for non-FMP buildings is about between $14 and $19 million. It's always subject to negotiation. And from that allocation, we also do work on recreation centers that are attached to school buildings and some other dually shared facilities. So certainly the ratio of resources that we have annually to do that required maintenance work doesn't line up with the actual building condition survey work. So if you take out the FMP-related projects, and it's 13 buildings in that cohort, we still very much are in need of, the resources don't line up to solve the actual problem.
So I'm reading in the top, in the second sentence on page 5 about costing on an annual basis between 30 and 60 million to really support.
That's our rough estimate as to what it would cost to keep up with the annual maintenance for the 53 facilities, whether they're in FMP or not.
So what do we do?
We are very creative with the $17 million that we're able to spend. We negotiate very very forcefully with our colleagues at the city to maximize those resources. And we basically prioritize the required maintenance as best we can. Do we get it all? No. The other part of it is the ordinance that only allows us by current CIP allocation to do work that's health and safety related. So we are able to do very little instructional work in classrooms that are non-FMP buildings. That also hamstrings us greatly. So principals will give us a targeted list of improvements that they'd like at a particular building. Let's take school number 39, for example. Has not yet been renovated, is not in phase 2, and we don't have yet a phase 3 to work on. So that building could be several years out. The way that the ordinance is clearly outlined by our city council, that building, we would not be able to do classroom upgrades in that building using capital improvement funds. They must wait until the modernization program gets to them. So it does create very much a challenge for us. The other part of it is we have buildings, especially in phase 1, School 50, for example, that we only did a portion of that building in our phase 1 renovation. We did a lot of K-8 work in the addition, so there's a large segment of that building that still needs the appropriate level of classroom upgrades, and that building will have to come back around in a subsequent phase of modernization. So there's several different challenges that we're trying to kind of balance between our own capital improvement resources, which don't meet the target, as well as the lack of clarity around when a phase 3, phase 4, or phase 5 will come. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
We receive our capital funds as a result of bonding. Is that how
That's correct.
that happens? Okay.
Yes.
So we're limited in terms of the amount of bonding that the city would approve?
In a sense, yes, without getting too much into the weeds, but yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So the 60 million, that's that dollar amount, that even with the facilities modernization project, you're still believe that we need to have $30 to $60 million annually for the capital?
In order to meet the targeted building condition survey items, that's just a very rough estimate as the amount of resources it would take to do that annual maintenance at the facilities we have. And the one part of that is if we don't do it through capital work, then if it's something that we need to do, replacing a boiler, whatever it might be, it's going to come from somewhere, and it may come from the general fund, and that's not an aidable project. So we're much better served as a community being much more proactive with our capital improvement funding and doing a lot of this work with having that reimbursable rate at 98% than letting it sit and then sending our guys out there to do maintenance on windows and so forth, where you're not getting any money back in terms of reimbursement.
Okay.
So that's why the capital improvement project is really so valuable to us.
And so on page 11, lease space, reducing the use of lease space. Talk a little bit about that, Mike. Where are we in terms of, because that's important since we've closed a couple of schools. We've closed 22 schools,
Sure.
and
36.
I'm not sure. Yeah, so
36.
we closed schools. So, and probably this connects with the reduction of our student population, but it would seem to me if we're closing these schools that we may need to go into lease space. But talk a little bit about that.
I think it kind of ties into two parts of it. Certainly it ties into some anticipated work, planning work that we're going to be undertaking this summer and this fall, that we're going to look to do an updated look at our space utilization across the district. When the master plan was first done, I think it was 2011 was the actual date, and then a subsequent strategic plan. We've had many changes to our own demographics here. Our increased amount of pre-K programming, our changing in the allocation of space for our students with special needs, the programming for English language learners. Among those are really three big items we have. So that is a stress on our space utilization. All those programs require specialized spaces, for lack of a better term. So yes, I think your assumption may be correct that we may be looking to a lease space as a possible solution. I think before we jump there, though, we really need to have a much more complete analysis of the current spaces we have, how we're utilizing those spaces, what our programmatic needs are going to be, and kind of project that out, 3, 5, 7, 10 years to kind of get a sense of what that may be. The one challenge we have in this community is that the lease spaces that are actually available, which we did a cursory look at that in the fall, really aren't suitable for as long-term solutions for us. Many of them are former parochial schools or private schools, and they just kind of reached end of life at their own, or they need so much investment of capital for them to be suitable for us to lease. Both of those end up being probably not the best fiscal choice. Right now, our two main spaces for lease space are the Hart Street location and the Martin Street location. Martin Street obviously we've had several different conversations about that. We mainly utilize that for alternative programming, office space. We do have records in that location, and so forth. So it's kind of I'm going to try to use my phrasing. I don't want to say catch-all, but it's a bit of a multi-purpose space for us, but certainly not space that we can easily utilize to replicate an elementary or a secondary program. So we've got to go back and really analyze the actual existing spaces. And the last part of that is because the modernization program we're right in full swing in terms of our phase 2 with the 13 projects. In order to keep that on schedule, we must have swing spaces to rotate those students through. And if you're unable to close out and move students into renovated buildings, then you won't be able to maximize the swing space usage. So we're really running into a bit of a headwind in terms of finding enough swing spaces to move these 13 schools and then subsequent phases, especially high school swing space, where you want to move an entire program for a 1 or 2 year period, do the building in full, and then move the students back. That's a far more fiscally responsible way than kind of doing it piecemeal. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope I got you to the target.
Page 27, the 3-year rotation was suspended. The city enacted a resolution that limited what school buildings could be addressed. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's the one I referred to earlier. It's the ordinance that council changed, I think it was 18 months ago, which only allows us to do work under 4 criteria, health and safety being the primary one. With that being said, our rotation of buildings was kind of based upon not only the maintenance level of needs, but also the instructional needs. We always would modify that if a building was in a modernization program or not, but now with this extra stipulation of health and safety being the firm guideline from City Council, it really...
Health and safety?
The only work that we're able to use the bonding for is work that would be deemed required for health and safety purposes. That's one of the key languages in the ordinance. So therefore, the rotation really doesn't quite work for us anymore. We've got to go back and relook at how we target particular projects in a building.
Page 37.
We would like to have that ordinance modified. It would allow us much more flexibility.
How would you like to have it modified?
I think the discretionary part of it for us, once we have the resources secured, we certainly have to target the projects that we believe are in the best interest of our students and schools here. To really hamstring us and only say that it can only be health and safety, for example, Building 39 or Building 52, they're not in FMP for the foreseeable future. So to not do any classroom upgrades at that building, to not revitalize the kindergarten classrooms, really puts those students at a very distinct disadvantage to students that are in either buildings that have been modernized or buildings that we did some kindergarten classroom upgrades, like Freddie Thomas, for example, or Building 54, which those classrooms are so much more dynamic than classrooms in those other buildings. That's just a very rudimentary example.
So School 39 is not a part of the FMP?
It has not been renovated as of yet. It certainly is in the queue for renovation going forward, but not, I couldn't tell you it's going to be done in 2026 or 2023. Right. I just don't have that information yet.
Okay. All right. And then on page 37 for the Ryan building, I'm looking at the total project cost for adding a door is $25,000, but we're talking about a bond in the amount of $795,000.
I'm sorry, I guess I lost
Page
it.
20,
Right,
page
the Ryan Center project.
Yes.
So we're going to do some work. The work at the Ryan Center is all in the rec center. So the rec center work is eligible for reimbursement because we're using the rec center for physical education and other parts in that school. So we're able to do significant upgrades in that facility. So we're not putting an actual $25,000 door in. We've got to change the partition that divides the gym, and that upgrade, as well as we're going to do some air conditioning work in that facility. But the number is correct, but it's more than just a door. There's quite a bit of work.
So we probably should have had more detail around what that $795 bond?
Yes, obviously in hindsight, we certainly can provide that. We just actually provided that document. We've had several revisions of this, so we're a little bit at the, mercy might be the wrong word, but at the discretion of our partners in the city, because they obviously dictate an awful lot of the scope of work that is done in the rec center. So we're kind of more mirroring it for our document. They drive a lot of that conversation. We actually just provide them guidance as to what's eligible for aid or not.
And then just my last question under page 45, building condition.
I'm drawing a blank. I'll get back to you on that one. It'll take me one text message, and I should have it in momentarily.
All right, thank you.
Mainly the HVAC, the plumbing contractor, and so forth, but the EC,
Yeah,
I'll get
usually
the...
it's HVAC,
Exactly.
that's
So
why I was-
I'll get the EC for you. That was pretty good, though. I had 9 out of 10.
So what, EC is what?
I don't know yet. I'm going to find out. Let me get my phone and text my... Don't I get the phone a friend for one question?
There you go.
Right.
Thank you, Vice President.
My questions are more programmatic, so Everton, I don't know if you'll be able to answer or not, but I just want a little brief overview on the plan for summer learning as it particularly relates to the younger students, pre-K. Can you hear me now?
Thank you.
Okay. Summer learning as it relates particularly to the pre-K spend. What are we doing for the summer pre-K kids in terms of dollar amount and programming?
Okay, looking for Dr. March.
I apologize.
Did you hear my question?
I did not.
My question relates to summer learning and in particular the pre-K students. What are we doing there?
Let me explain a little
Yep.
bit about that. With the pre-K funding, we are not allowed to use that money to run during the school-type program and a summer program. You can only choose one or the other. So we have no pre-K grant funds going into any summer programs because we're not allowed to do that. We do have two classrooms, one at 25 and one at 33, that are ramp-up. And that is, even though they start early during the summer, it's not considered a summer school program. It's considered an extended year program, and it's something we piloted, we're going to do again, because they start 3 weeks early, but there's no break. They start 3 weeks early, and they go through the whole school year. So that's the only funded program that we have for preschoolers in the district this year that I know of. I do know we have CBOs that are running some programs with private funding.
Sure. So I think we've been hearing a lot of concerns and advocacy from people who've been advocating for LEAP, and that has been restored or never was threatened, whatever the case may be. But the pre-K component of LEAP, I think, is something that, speaking for myself, I really, really value what is being done with this cohort evaluation to see how it can help third grade reading. And I know that there are some cohorts that have been moving up. So that means that some of the private money that was able to support the young ones, the little ones, now is being devoted to prioritize supporting that cohort as it grows up. So have we closely examined the ability to, and maybe this isn't, I don't know what level this question is for, in terms of prioritizing possibly if we could match some of the private money to some extent by using, the valuable, preciously scarce other resources that we have?
I hear the ask. I don't have a response to that other than we'll look into that and get back with you with an appropriate response.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I'll
I appreciate it.
Okay.
My other question is,
Microphone.
I feel like I'm at the United Nations because Commissioner Powell has those.
Not only that, but I can't see the.
¿Tú puedes oírme ahora? Yo voy a hablar en español porque las personas aquí no hablan en inglés. All right. Can you comment on, what do we, how much are we spending? I was looking in the budget for transportation for summer school overall, and are we providing summer transportation for the students involved in summer learning? Were we able to do that?
Let me ask, Mike, to speak to that. Yes, we are providing transportation.
Dr. Schmidt? Dr. Schmidt?
Electrical, yeah, I'm a doctor, all right.
We just made him chief a few months ago.
Exactly, right? Small steps. My mom always wanted me to get one, and I just haven't quite gotten around to it. Electrical contractor, by the way.
Oh, you're right, was that?
So, but you gotta get.
I had a friend in the back who was monitoring my language, and where is he? Anyway, we are providing transportation for our summer students. The high school number, the secondary number, will be determined hopefully within the next. The final determination will hopefully be determined within the next, I would say, week or so. We're just finalizing some of the action. It's based upon time and location of the programming and the number of students. So those three variables drive the number of buses we would use, and hence drive the cost of the service. We are in the final midst of negotiations with RTS, who provides the majority of the transportation for our high school program. So we'll be able to report back to you really quickly with regards to that exact number. The elementary portion of it, once again, is also contingent on number of students, location, but we will have two parts of it. One, it'll be less than it was last summer. We've consolidated programming into a fewer number of buildings, which in a sense allows us to maximize transportation costs. And the second piece of that is because we've staggered some times, especially at the secondary level, and mobilized middle school and some other ancillary secondary programs into consolidating this into a smaller number of buildings, that overall cost will go down. We had an extensive number of programs in a wide variety of buildings, which were successful, but also with that separation drives the transportation number to begin with. So it's not quite as simple as being able to say it's going to be whatever dollar figure until we have the exact termination of the number of students and the actual location. So hopefully within the next week or 10 days tops, we'll be able to have that figure for you, and then we would correspond through Everton. Yep.
Thanks. I'll come back if I have other.
President White. All right. Just a couple quick questions.
Don't forget Liz, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry. Oh, she snuck in. Oh, okay. Commissioner Hallmark, welcome. Yes, you have questions?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I have a few questions. And I apologize if this has already been answered. I was 15 minutes late. I know you were talking a little bit earlier about the 5 curriculum writers, and that it's being piloted at a few schools. Can you tell me what schools those are being piloted at?
I'm sorry, it's the 5 schools where the TOAs were assigned initially, and I don't have that in front of me, but if you give me 5 minutes, I can go and get it off my computer.
That's fine.
Or I can forward that to you in an email through the superintendent.
That's fine.
Yes.
Email's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other, I noticed in response to someone's question about the African American Studies Department in 2017-18.
Yes.
That the position is being, there's a hope that that role will have an integral part in the development of culturally relevant curriculum.
Yes, ma'am.
And so my simple question was, K through 12? Secondary,
yes,
primary?
Yes, it will be K-12. It will be K through 12.
So this candidate would be
yes,
the whole?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one, I know that there was recently a 333 meeting, the city, the county, and the district meeting, and in that meeting we were talking about our focus for the upcoming year, and there's a hope to do a better job on the summer jobs offering, and I noticed that there's some money in the budget for 2017 summer jobs. And I don't know if this is a question to ask now, or maybe you have some thoughts, but heads up, I'd like to see that number go up. Wonder if you have any ideas about that. I know there's an interest with the city and the county on partnering with that, and getting more jobs for students in the summer in
I know right
following
now,
years.
the plan, based upon the numbers we have, is about 140.
Yes.
We actually have budgeted $300,000.
Yes.
And every year we have underspent that amount. So I know they're doing their diligence to make sure we get as many as we can. I know we have two agreements, one with the city, where last year and I think the year before, they employed 30 students. And even though they're employing them through their department, we actually fund it. So they get that. So we have a contract with them, and we pay for that. So a part of the $300 is that. Then we also have another contract with the library system, where we have some students going in.
Literacy.
And literacy.
Yeah.
So I think this year when I spoke with Nydia, is that the city they're switching 10 students. One is doing 10 less. So even though they're doing 10 less, we as a district, we're still making sure that we have availability to all our students to make sure we expend all that money. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to piggyback on what Commissioner Hallmark said. One of the things that I'm doing from any platform that I can be at.
I'm sorry, Cynthia, I can't hear you.
As loud as I'm talking.
It's only coming through the mic. I can't hear it.
One of the issues that I'm really going to be speaking about from any platform that I can be at, and speaking it from the mountaintop, is that we have to give our kids summer jobs. And I tend to believe that if we're going to have some impact, I remember Mary Adams' husband mentioning one time that when we grew up, everybody had a summer job.
mm-hmm.
So you could buy your clothes, you could take yourself out to dinner, you had some money. I remember growing up, I used to have a wad, because I didn't have to pay any bills or anything, right? So, I could loan people money and that kind of thing. And so it just made a huge difference in the lives of our young people. And so I really would like to, and that's part of the conversation that we had in the 3-on-3-on-3. And I also had this conversation when the National Leagues of Cities were in Rochester too, to talk about we need to make sure we can get our kids summer jobs. Because first of all, it gives them skills. They can learn how to engage in a place of employment. They can learn and look at how other people engage in work, coming to work on time, and those kinds of soft skills that our young people need to have as they move into their career once they graduate from high school and college. And so it's very important, not only that, but what it does for the economy. When a kid can buy his own school clothes, they like those, kind of high-priced sneakers and stuff. When they could buy that, it does something in terms of a sense of self. And so I will continue to shout this from the mountaintop that we need to make sure that we have summer jobs for our kids. I talked to Joe Morelli about it. I talked to, just a host of the state delegation about it. We've got to get more summer jobs for our kids, because if we can make sure that we invest in our kids, then we won't have to have an expense for our kids. And they are more than likely to, enter into positive activities as they move forward in their life, and not into negative activities, meaning, possibility of having to sell drugs and those kinds of things, because they do that in order to take care of themselves. So I'm not asking anything now. I'm just putting that on the table, that I'm going to be shouting this from the rooftop, from the mountaintop, that in every venue that I'm at, that we've got to make sure we have summer jobs for our children. Thank you.
We can answer that for you if you want. Commissioner Hallmark?
I'm done.
You're done?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a couple of quick questions from my end. Thank you for the report on chronically absent. I know we asked for that and we received it. But I'm looking at the numbers, and is this really the report in terms of the percentages of chronically absent children that we have in our schools? Somebody sort of address this report a little bit?
Ray.
Ray, can you? No. Jerome, where you been, man?
Mr.
I was
Underwood.
going to say, welcome him
Where you
back.
been? They don't let you out.
Now they do. I went to had to get a new knee.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
No, it's good news. Trust me. It's good news. Thank you, Commissioner. Good evening, Commissioners.
Welcome back, and I'm glad you're feeling better.
I am. Thank you.
So as we got this report with regard to this 5-year campus-based chronic absenteeism report for all the schools, and the numbers here, I mean, at first glance, are pretty shocking. Just to give a couple examples, with a population of 326 children, well, let me just do something a little more dramatic. School number 9, with 758 children, 322 are considered chronically absent. Is that, am I reading this correctly?
You're reading it
Or
absolutely correctly.
43% of our children that go to that school are chronically absent.
Correct. It's 9.
Oh, number 9.
So,
Can you
Commissioner,
define chronically?
yes. First of all, I'm so glad you asked the question because, as the commissioners may know, we have been trying to focus on chronic absence now. I think we're in our actually 4th year of really trying to address this. I'm glad the concern has risen to this level. So, Commissioner Hallmark, let me answer your question. The definition of chronic absence is missing 10% of school for any reason, i.e. 18 or more days. We ended the year, last year, district-wide at about just shy of 33% of our students, K-12. So about 9,000 students. It's extremely difficult. Kindergarten is one of our worst attending grades. So the issues facing our parents are complex and they're varied. Myself and others have been into many houses to find out the why. The key is why. And the goal is to try to bridge the gap between the challenges that parents are facing and the delivery systems that can address those gaps. 3 years in a row, we reduced the number of chronically absent students up to last year by 1,700. We're nowhere where we need to be. Good school districts are in the 20% range or lower, K-12. So it's a sobering number, but the main issue around attendance is one of academic outcomes as opposed to attendance, because we know if a student is not in class, he or she does not get exposed to the kind of teaching and learning that's required. More so, chronic absence hurts students who actually come to school all the time, because if Jerome is not there all the time, then all of a sudden I show up after being gone for a week. The teacher has to slow down for me at the expense of the other students who are coming at a high rate. So it's a very challenging issue, and one that at least I certainly think that we should pay much more attention to, and so we can reduce our numbers even more. So this year to date, I'm concerned about our numbers this year, because what we're trying to do is hold on to the gains we got from last year, which is increasingly difficult. So we're a little bit behind the pace of last year. Believe it, I was just looking at the numbers on the computer just now. Sobering number.
Yes.
I think that this is something that I think that the board may need to help in terms of our communications plan, because I think that we have to help our parents to have vision. But we can't have them, they can't have vision if they don't have information. So if we could talk to them, for example, about the value of being in school, meaning that, you know, if you're in school and you get these many courses, you can graduate all the time, you know, that kind of information. I remember when I spoke at one of the graduations, and when I talked about literacy, you could hear a pin drop in that room. So people, I believe, our parents and our community want to do the right thing, but if they don't have the information, then they can't make the kinds of decisions that will benefit their children and to benefit our families. And so that's one of the things I like for us to do commissioners will go on, some of the television programs and talk about, radio and talk about the value. But, places where our parents are going to be listening, because I believe that they really want the best of their children. They may not always know how to do it, particularly if you have young parents who dropped out of school themselves. They may not understand, may not even have time to look at, what a vision may be for their children. So we've got to do more of that on the board level as well.
You hit
to get the narrative out into the community.
You're hitting a big nail on the head, Commissioner, because awareness is key. Because just to say what you said in a slightly different way, when we did focus groups with parents, not one parent does not value education for their child. But what many were unaware of is the actual correlation between just showing up. Because when our parents are facing, you name it, eviction, mental health issues, unemployment, etc., all the things that really allow us to be the second or fifth poorest city in the country, depending on which list you look at. So those things, their priorities get shifted based on basic needs that they have. And for instance, with kindergarten, you wonder, why would our kindergartens not be at school? The learning that happens, we have a great early childhood program in Rochester. But we have, the numbers there, Commissioner Cruz, we have in kindergarten, children are almost absent, chronically absent at a 60% rate.
Because the reason is because they don't, that's not really required. It's not required now.
And there's no transportation for it. Exactly.
Okay, maybe no transportation.
Right.
So it's not that they may not want to come.
Right.
We haven't presented it as well as we can, and we haven't presented it in a way in which they can also be empowered to make the right decision.
Precisely.
I hear in this community too much about, well, these kids are poor, so they can't do this, that, and the other. Stop that noise. That's just noise. What we have to do is to make sure that we provide them with the information, and that be the motivating factor
to
get
power.
them out of poverty.
Exactly.
But they don't need to have everything. We don't need to give them everything. We just need to provide them with the information. They'll make a way out of nowhere. That's our church.
No question. No
we
question.
make a way out of nowhere. So I think we have to, in some way, rediscuss the narrative such that we really have true collaborative relationships where not only do we have the information as professionals, but our parents have it so we can empower them.
Absolutely.
The other thing, too, is that the best thing you can do to really encourage attendance in those buildings is the kids will be used to going to school regularly. So in pre-K and K, because then they're starting to set the behaviors and expectations early on.
Yeah, and that's what we have to talk to about our parents.
That helps.
Exactly what he's saying.
Well,
right?
And hopefully the commissioners know, and if you don't know, that's why the focus is on pre-K 3. The Every Minute Matters campaign is focused primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on the early grades to develop the pattern of attendance. Man, you didn't come out your house much, man.
I broke that streak.
But they go out.
But I think that because kids, they want to come to school.
It's a safe haven.
I mean, that's where they get. It's social. They want to come. They want to come to school.
I appreciate the response. It's certainly an area that I think we really need to focus in on and look at some more kind of strategic planning around it. Because one of the things, if you look at the numbers, you notice that the lowest levels of chronic absenteeism are amongst those schools that are the most successful in our district. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to draw the correlation between the two, right? If kids go to school in a substantial amount of percentages, high percentages, they do well. So the question is, how do we get to them? What's that message? And maybe it's because, for me to think that parents don't know, it's hard for me to understand. given all the information that we send out, the movements, the word on Sundays at churches and all those things, there's something else missing in this message. And we've got to figure out what that is. Because if we don't fix that problem, I don't care how much money we pour into our schools and how many great teachers we have, we can't educate children who are not there. It just doesn't work. So, but I think it's probably, it's not a discussion for tonight, but I think it's something that needs a lot more discussion in terms of what is it that's missing in this process. And I think it has an overall effect over our entire success for any school and any student in this district. And if you look at these numbers, these are so telling. I mean, it's there, you know? So, but thank you for that feedback, and hopefully we'll be hearing more about that. The other thing, real quick question, how much are we spending on summer school transportation, Everton?
We don't have that information as yet.
You're going to be working on that. Okay. All right. Is most of that aidable?
About, when you do the calculation for summer school, it comes out to about 55% of summer school transportation that is aidable.
So the 45% comes out of our
Yes.
our general fund. Okay. All right. And then sort of in that same realm, this is my last question for tonight, but I've had the opportunity over the last couple of weeks to go around like during dismissal for schools, and this is completely anecdotal. There's no science behind this at all. So I'm making a statement based on absolute no facts, other than observations. So I want to get that out there. I'm not like a certain person in D.C., but I will own to the fact that this is not science. But it seems to me that I was looking at many of our buses, especially leaving our high schools, and how many of them struck me. Leaving the school, not going, but leaving the school, were either half empty, a third empty, or in some cases 75% empty. Right? Now, my question is, because when are we beginning negotiations for transportation for the yellow buses?
Or smaller buses.
The contract that we have, 5-year contract.
We went 5 years, 2 years ago?
Could I add to that?
Well, wait a minute, let me get my, then
Well, I just want to add an anecdote to it. I noted this morning when my son got on the bus, there might have been about 7 people on a bus with a capacity of 50 or 60. I mean, and his was at the edge of the 1.5 miles, so he would have been one of the last kids to get on that bus. It was nearly empty.
So we're at the year, what's this, beginning year 3 of year 5, of the 5 years?
It's a 5-year agreement with, it's an annual, the term I'm looking for, renewable annually, excuse me.
Because it would seem
Per
to me
student
that
Monroe.
we, again, anecdotal, I could be absolutely wrong, but we need to audit somewhere along the line what happens to these children in terms of how many absolutely use the school bus to get to school during when school begins, and then how many of them actually end up using it to get home after school. Now, in some cases, I understand after school, there's after-school activities and those kinds of things. But if you look at the number between how many get there and how many end up leaving and using the school bus, I'm wondering if we are at not at capacity, and if we're only at 75%, let's say on a kind of positive note, 75% capacity on our school buses, that we're paying for 25% extra space that we're not using. And if that's the case, that could be a huge amount because we spend so much money on transportation, which it's got to be close to $60 million right now. So you start doing and extrapolating the math on this, and there could be a couple dollars of savings there. I don't know. Again, not scientific, but I throw it out there.
So I want to address that because that was one of my questions, was an actual study of ridership. that we could see over time, because there's a substantial opportunity for savings, but also a substantive conversation about how we might think out of the box and do something differently. We have a transportation, a brief fresh eyes review that Mike and Jim Giordano are working on that I've asked for initial data. There are other cities that have resolved the transportation issues using some innovative approaches like hackathons and such, and I've asked Mike to lead that kind of work as well. But I do think that we're aware that the operational efficiencies in the district are going to have to be significantly increased, but it's not as easy as just cutting 3 or 5% out of the budget. We have to now look at a total redesign and reimagination of the system, so that's going to require a different approach, but I appreciate the fact that we're at the point where we're looking at that level of detail, because the same might be asked about the number of students sitting in individual classrooms across the district. And so that's something we're going to correct as well. But I'd like Mike to amplify more the Fresh Eyes Transportation study and the work that you're leading right now.
So I think your anecdotal evidence is probably, our observation is probably more the accurate reflection than not. And the variables in that process are really...
That's a community observation, not just a commission.
Without question. So I think as a service provider, you have to weigh in all the different pieces of that puzzle. So I don't think any of us in the transportation delivery operations part of it is comfortable with the current dynamics that are in place. We certainly don't set out to come up with an inefficient system by any means, but you're trying to balance the options that students have, the requirements that we have in terms of charter schools, our private parochial transportation, urban, suburban, as well as the door-to-door transportation that we have within a particular area. All of that adds to a very tight system. On the outside of the system, there is a tremendous shortage of drivers. We don't have a shortage of buses, we have a shortage of drivers because of the qualifications to be a driver from the state of New York are very challenging. So it's there's several different things that are pulling on the system and causing us to be as inefficient as we are. So as the superintendent alluded to, we've all agreed, whether it's Maria or Wayne in the actual office or myself and other members of the community, that we need to have another set of eyes take a look at what we're doing, not only from our inventory of buses to the evaluation of the contracts that we currently are working with, to, I think most importantly in that equation is the delivery, the service model that we're using to figure out a way that we can be more efficient, or to provide a series of recommendations that will keep the same level of service with in a more fiscally responsible way. I think one of the best anecdotes, and you didn't use school 10 as one of them, but we bus every single student to school number 10. Every single student gets bused to that school, and there's not enough room on that block to accommodate all the buses as they line up to drop the students off. And in a sense, when you're talking about moving an entire system over the course of 90 minutes, school 10, school 4, school number 5, all at very tight sites, there's many more, where you have to turn around 10, 12, 15 buses safely, move them in and out, drop the students off in an orderly manner, and move them on to their next site. So you have time pressures, you have our own traffic pressures and construction within the city, as well as our own internal decisions that we've made in terms of allowing students a variety of choices of where we are. And for the most part, many of our schools are not necessarily located where most of the students are actually originating from. So there's many different things, and I think you're right. It's not any one particular variable that's causing this, but I believe it would be helpful for everybody involved to have a fresh set of eyes take a look at this, provide us a series of recommendations, and then kind of work from there. And we may need further study, or we may need to begin to implement those and find a budget solution. But your number of 60 million is correct, and the actual numbers of students that are on the buses are accurate, and we didn't even get into the alternative programs. And that's a whole other level of challenge that we have that is really an underutilized service.
Okay. Thank you. It was just an observation. I mean, thank you for the information. And I know it also has to do with, Commissioner Powell's concerns about, hardening the boundaries and those kinds of the impact that might have. So I think it's a bigger question in terms of how we address this. But certainly, I mean, if we're spending so much in the way of buses, and we have 25% of them that are vacant, then I think that alone creates enough of a question to be able to go in and find out, at least to see why.
Right.
And if we mitigate that by looking at, as you're saying, what other kinds of alternative things we could be taking a look at. For instance, if somebody is getting busing and they're not using it, right? Let's say somebody's getting busing and they're not using it, and that bus driver stops at that person's house, and I see it on my block, stops at that person's house and waits there for those 2 or 3 minutes, and no child comes out, and it goes day after day after day. That tells me that if that's happening on my block, how many other blocks is that happening? And what does that mean in terms of cost to this district? And at what point do we determine whether somebody is not utilizing the service and to be able to address that issue?
We have about 87 routes at each run in the morning, whether it's an expanded day route or a regular route, and we try to balance those off with the number of schools that are in each tier. The actual stopping when students are not going to get on the bus and have no intention of getting on the bus is not unique. That happens on every single run. We're required to stop. You're required to provide transportation for every student in the district, but there are some ways that we can navigate that a little bit differently to create the efficiencies. I think the other part of it is we try to navigate the 60 minutes on the bus ride for students so that we can, so when students aren't on the bus for an inordinate amount of time. So there's a balance there as well. So there's no simple answers to this by any means. And I think that part of it is helpful. So once we have this work, we'll have a series of recommendations, and I think it's important for the board members to, before we make policy decisions, to have that data on the front end, because we may think we're making a policy decision that may have a fiscal result, but ultimately it may not. There may be other reasons why you want to make a policy decision, but the fiscal part of transportation may not be what we want to do. So, but we have quite a few challenges, and my phone rings endlessly about our effectiveness or lack of effectiveness in regards to that.
So we can appreciate, I just want to respond, we can appreciate the frustration, but again, just know that transportation and the operations areas have been a significant area that you all know we've been working on. You do have to use design and really get out of the box, okay? Because the traditional framing of the problem is going to get the same solutions. And going to a different model, and I can provide examples of how other communities have done this, will require us to have some different kinds of conversations, okay? So again, once we get the fresh eyes view, we'll then engage folks in a design thinking process. We'll have them look at other communities that have solved similar problems. When you look at the percentage of the budget that is being spent on transportation, as well as the underutilization of the resource, you're absolutely right. So this is an area that we think will be significant in our strategic planning for the future. But Mike can also add that the state aid and reimbursement formulas are such that sometimes you can make what looks like significant reductions, but they don't actually result in a great monetary impact, but just an imprint in terms of gas and utilization and perception will go a long way, right?
Absolutely.
So just to follow up on that, in light of the absentee conversation we just had, when we have students who are chronically absent, so at what point does the bus stop going to that home? After 3 days, a week, or is there, do you have any kind of regulation around that?
Once the student is routed, we generally don't take that stop off of a route if the student is still enrolled in the school.
So you would go as long as...
Yes, I wouldn't want to have any hard and fast rule to it, but I think that part of it is that part of the efficiency process, we don't tend to not stop. I have an awful lot of calls where people will, utilize other options in the morning. A grandparent will take the child to school. So you just don't know, and I think we end up with more challenges than not. We generally don't have a 21-day, student never getting on the bus kind of a thing, and us continue to stop and wait. But I think because the driver will report back to the main office, and we'll work on that with the school to figure out what's actually going on with that particular student. One area that we are making some improvements on is in food service, where we are monitoring the attendance at a particular building. And it's probably not necessarily a positive piece, but it is allowing us to make better use of our resources in terms of food service. So if we have a No one will ever not have a meal, but certainly that will allow us to prepare a more reasonably portioned or reasonable amount of food on a particular basis on a school-by-school basis. So that part is helpful. The transportation piece is just, there's a layer of challenges, and welcome all the thoughts to it, because there's certainly, on the front end, we've been much more valuable than on the back end. So principals have been very helpful with us to try to navigate different challenges and be able to help us with items. And we didn't even take into account weather. So the variables are really endless.
Seems like technology could be an interesting tool as well.
That's
I
been
think
very
about
helpful.
like the Uber app, like where are buses, and I don't.
All with the GPS coordinates and all the buses, that's been a great help to us. But so we have made quite a bit of improvements in terms of our on-time efficiency over the course of my short time in terms of doing this. But there's certainly more that can be done. As Superintendent alluded to, much of that is aidable expenses, and it allows us to put up on the front end, but we get huge gains on the back end of that. So we can spend a lot of time discussing transportation, that's for sure.
Yeah, we definitely can. I think there's interest in being able to do that. So this will be a discussion for further review. But thank you very much for the feedback. We're going to go through this the last round, starting at the end. GC, last questions.
Okay. This may have been addressed earlier, and if it has, my apologies. We've got the summary of the budget allocation, the FTE allocation changes that were handed out. What's the timing of rolling this back into the school profiles and budgets? The Section 4 information, so you've got the individual information for each and every school.
That's what we're doing now to make sure that as we present the budget book to the board for them to vote on May 11th, we're incorporating all of this into the budget book.
So May 11th is the timing to pull that together. If we want individual schools, just go ahead and submit that to you for this next round? Okay. All right, great, thank you.
So it takes a lot of work to get the budget book together, so we wouldn't do a mid-budget book, but everything here will be incorporated. And that's what happened. What we have here is what's pulled out of the system as we've added it. So if we push the button starting today, all hands on deck, the budget book will have everything that you see here in it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
No questions.
Sorry, we're having a sidebar here. Are we all set on your end? Commissioner Holler?
No questions.
No questions. Commissioner Powell?
Okay, so I saved my question for the CIP for this round, and my observations are, I'm going to look at Mike, but I'm really addressing it to the superintendent, but I can't see her, so I'm going to look at Mike. I'm very, very concerned about the city's unilateral ordinance governing what they will approve for CIP. It seems on its face like an end run around the maintenance of effort law. Since they can't reduce our operating aid, they're reducing our capital improvement aid. Even though reimbursements being what they are, the city and the school district would benefit greatly by servicing all of our schools to the greatest extent possible. It's good stewardship. The buildings belong to the city and will go back to the city when they cease being educational use. It makes no sense to me. And it seems to me that it's cutting off, that the city is cutting off its own nose to spite its face. I'm also concerned about the unilateral aspect of that ordinance. Once upon a time, the relationship between the city and the school district was a bilateral agreement. We did some things for the city did some things for us. It was all put down on paper. And I'm especially concerned that we are agreeing to do rec center work, which helps the city, at the same time that the city is putting a stranglehold on our ability to upgrade classrooms. It seems like either they're being very heavy-handed or we're doing a really lousy job of negotiating quid pro quos with the city. And if you have a comment or a response to that, that's great. But what I really am striving for here is some hope or assurance that we're going to negotiate better going forward with the city on capital improvement spending. Reimbursement is nearly 100%. It doesn't make any sense that the city would not fund as much as we possibly can because, Cynthia, you raised this question in the previous round. The city has the bonding capacity, all right? We are well below the portion of the bonding capacity that had been previously negotiated between the city and this new city ordinance seems to be basically negating all previous agreements, in terms of percentage of the city's bonding authority. We're well below the bonding authority. This new agreement puts us below the amount that we retire in the previous year, which was part of previous requirements that limited our ability to tap into bonded resources. I'm extremely frustrated and concerned that our stewardship of these buildings is going to be impaired.
I think there's three parts to that. Oh, God, I'm sorry.
Let me just say this. I'm wondering if this may be a conversation that we can have at the 3-on-3-on-3.
I would like to hear Mike's and the superintendent's response. Thank you.
That was going to be one of the points. I think that
The county's got no place in that conversation.
in terms of the CIP, I think you're absolutely correct. I think it is an investment in the facilities that we all share. Three parts of that very quickly. The idea of us taking advantage of state guidelines for renovating of recreation centers that are attached to school buildings or fields that are attached to schools, I think is in everyone's best interest. We're using those facilities, and we're really creating a legacy of renovated areas for our students to take advantage of. And so that's I just think, a good practice we should take part in. And I believe that to be the case. We're actually leaving a couple out there. The Jefferson Field at Edgerton Park would very easily look like the field at Franklin or the field at Wilson for a very small investment of local share, which we already have earmarked from in a previous document. So we should replicate what we're doing at Wilson and Franklin at Charlotte. We should replicate it at Douglas and every other area where we have secondary students that are participating in interscholastic athletics and staying on site. So recreation centers and fields are I think, really advantageous for us. In terms of the maintenance, there's a misnomer, I believe. It's kind of like when you build a brand new home and you buy the home. It doesn't mean you don't do maintenance on that home on an annual basis, whatever that might be. And certainly on the first part with a new home, you do very small amounts, but in 5 years, you're going to need to do a significant project. You may want to do a bathroom upgrade or a kitchen upgrade, whatever it might be. The roof gets done in 15 or 20 years, and so on and so forth. So we need to change that belief that because a building is in either modernization or was recently modernized, that it shouldn't need maintenance done on it. That's not a great use of resources. And I think the third piece is, it's not for me to judge the negotiation part of it, but I would say this. I don't think the word negotiation is probably the best way to characterize the interaction. I think it's more of an arbitrary, here is the number, and this is what you will do. And then I think the most frustrating part is after that, now you're going to meet this criteria. So I think Vice President Ellie brings up a great point. I believe it. I believe in people's intentions to be good, right? So I think there's a belief in that whatever that may be. I just think it's not grounded in the actual facts of maintaining facilities for the next 100 years. And I think the ordinance just needs to be revised so that two things. One, we maximize the capital opportunity we have on an annual basis. And second, that we can do that certainly with oversight and people checking on us, mainly our Board of Education, and council, but not with the arbitrary that you can only do this work with this pool of resources. And I think if we tweak that one piece, then I think we'll be able to get right back on track with our projects.
I think two dynamics.
If I could comment, respond to your comment, I don't disagree that the use of CIP dollars on rec centers, athletic fields is valuable. But the city is getting the better end of the deal, and you said it right, you characterized it right. It's not a negotiation, it's unilateral. And like, when did that happen? And how did we allow that to happen? Once upon a time.
I believe in looking through the windshield, not the rearview mirror. I think we need to focus on the next round of CIP and not so much focus on what has happened with the last couple of months. We had a lot of turnover here. We've had a lot of variations. It could be a lot of different reasons, but Everton and I had some really good success at the end of this process. Yes. And I believe that that's the foundation for us going forward. I think the other piece of it is when we've said we've done the work and we said we're going to get 98% back on that work, we have done that every single year, almost without exception. We've met all the MWBE requirements. Our FMP projects that have moved forward have done what they said they were going to do. And I think that part of it builds credibility. And I hope that credibility lends to that next conversation, that if it's $19 million for the summer of 2018, then we get $19 million to spend, and if a rec center is part of that, terrific. But if it's $2 million of that, that allows us $17 million to take on some of the new initiatives that the superintendent and I have discussed, and that we're trying to bridge some of these schools to when they're up for full modernization. So there's a lot of different pieces of that puzzle, and if we were able to know we would have 18 for summer of the 18 million for the summer of 19, then you can lay out a reasonable pathway so that, once again, School 39, for lack of a better example, you know that's going to be in renovation 5 years out. We're going to need to go and put $4 to $6 million into that building, so that would not be torn out with renovation, but would mirror or married to that renovation, so that we'd have more money to use at a different location. So maybe we do the roof of that facility in CIP, so that when we do it in the modernization program, we have $6 or $7 million to do something else with. I mean, that's a silly example, but that would be the idea. So I think, to your point, that would be one of the first topics that I would suggest that we interface with members of council really as soon as possible, because we're starting the conversation for the next round of CIP.
The other part, too, is that we'll have a different city council come January 1.
Yes, but I think the foundation of it really, yes, I agree, but I think the foundation of it is principled, and if we build upon that way, it doesn't matter who's in the particular positions.
Well, and I
We'll have a different city council.
Yes, I didn't want to make eye contact.
I don't think our credibility on the CIP question has ever been in question. We've always done a fine job of stewardship through the CIP. That's one of the things that this district can hold itself up and say, this is one of the things we do well, is we take care of our physical structures. What we needed for the FMP had a whole lot more to do with the fact that state regulations on classroom sizes changed, right. The technology needs changed, but the bones of our buildings have always been solid because we've taken good care of them.
You got an unprecedented second double MCA to do maximum work at 8 elementary schools, and the main reason why we received that level of flexibility was because of the work and the credibility that Tom Casey and Eric Hansen have with State Ed. If they did not believe that we were going to do the work in those elementary schools and be disciplined to budget and be disciplined to timeline, then they would never have trusted us with that. None of their Big Five have ever come close to having that. So I think the proof's in that statement, and it kind of goes without saying.
Thank you, Mike.
You're very well. Thank you. Okay, going down the list here, who's next? Elliot?
Mike? Yes, sir. Yeah. Talk to me about food service. Did we have to do any cuts, or did we increase food service? Or do I need to do any advocacy around food service?
No, I think we're in very good shape. Our staffing has stayed stable. The number of meals are up significantly. We're up about 38,260 meals from last year.
What's the reason for that?
Great food, great service.
Okay.
I'm pretty serious. I mean, I really think that's really, all of our surveys with students, Deli has been absolutely incredible. The outreach from Ricky and the team really has made a huge difference. They've been very flexible in our delivery model, the investment in the hybrid kitchens, so that the food is a whole lot more, we don't have the pre-packs. 5 years ago, we had a significant portion of our daily meals were pre-packs. That's dropped quite a bit. Our fresh fruit and vegetable program really has been a great assistance to us. So that's allowed us to maintain the level of service. And if the number of meals were to go down, then obviously we'd have to adjust the staffing because of that. So no, I think we're in a good place right now with that. But we all know, much like transportation, it's a bit of an annual tightrope because we are at the variables of our day-to-day enrollment. But we took on almost every charter school that joined, and I don't really welcome the charter school part of that. I understand it's a challenge. Most of them, yes. Yep. Our food service operation does most of those schools, and they have choices.
But they pay us for those.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But they have choices in terms of where they can go, and when we've actually been competitive with them in terms of the meals, they've selected us. So that speaks volumes to our level of service.
One of the things that I hear, one criticism that I hear in the community is that when you're talking about older kids, we're only feeding them so much. And I hear a lot of parents and people in the community say that those kids are hungry. So how can we, we're giving them the required amount, and it's still not enough. They end up being hungry. So is there, well, just think about that.
Yes.
Because somehow, what the community is saying that they, these kids, especially if you're a sixth grader, you may be, 5'10" in the sixth grade.
Without question.
That small amount of food is not going to, fill you up. So there's got to be a way in which.
I was funny. That's where I see
That's been the challenge of any parent who's raised a teenager. It's like bottomless, right?
It just never ends, right? Mine went from 5'4" to 5'9", and I don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah, but some kind, because that's what I'm hearing from the community.
I think
and I've been hearing it for years, to tell you the truth.
The middle level programming, I think that's where we hear most of the concern. That's funny. That was the age because it's very. Obviously, the growth area and so forth is very different. There are regulations we have to follow. We have to follow portion size, but there are some ways we can navigate around that. So we need to do more of that.
Yeah, because I'm hearing that they're hungry. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Any last questions? Mr. President, I know you have a question.
Good evening. First of all, I wanted to thank Everton and his team and the superintendent to have reached a balanced budget was what was expected, but I know it's not easy, and so we appreciate your effort. You do it under intense pressure, and we are often judged by that, and so we can all take a quick sigh of relief for that effort. I also want to thank our staff and the central office staff for the work that they have done on providing answers to the questions that we have asked. For example, probably didn't surprise anybody, but I asked a question about graduation rates, and I saw, of course, that we now have Appendix 2.43.1, which provides us a analysis, if you will, of graduation rates. I appreciate that effort, but I wanted to do my own little quick analysis of that and describe for you what I think it's fair to say is a board expectation about that data and how it relates to the budget. So again, I'm looking for your information. I'm looking at Appendix 2.43.1. And again, this is my attempt to conduct a rudimentary analysis of that data and the impact that data should have on our budgetary decisions, although I'm not presenting anything today. For example, and again, if my numbers aren't exactly right, don't do your own analysis and get it right. But I think you'll understand where I'm going when I offer this analysis. I count 12 schools, and my numbers indicate that 5 had graduation rates that went up and 5 that went down. And again, I caution you all, if you come up with a different number here or there, don't focus in on that particularly. I would also note that of those schools that had their graduation rates went down, 4 of them, their graduation rates went down by 7 percentage points or more. All right? And it's no secret. I mean, I could identify these schools, and I actually think that would be appropriate, but I assume that everybody knows what I'm talking about because they can look at the chart. So for efficiency's sake, I won't go through with naming each and every one of them. But I would note that this information, this is why for years, the board has asked that this information be included because it allows real critical analysis on a data point that we are judged on. And when it's not in that document, I think it prevents us, the board, from doing the kind of quality work that it needs to do. So the second observation that I made was that, for example, in one of the schools that suffered the most difficult year, which would have been Vanguard, their graduation rate, if I'm reading this right, went down 11 percentage points. 11 percentage points in 1 year. Now, if you continue the analysis, and again, you can't say, well, we don't want to look at this, we don't want to talk about this during budget time because it could be embarrassing. No, this is what we have to do because you can make decisions based on this. So the Vanguard went down 11 percentage points in 1 year. And then you look at their average daily attendance, and you're not surprised. Again, using the stuff that was already in the budget book, their average daily attendance was 69%. If I have that right, and again, I apologize if I've been on a college road trip with my daughter and my wife, and I'm a little bit tired, but I think I got these numbers right, 69%. So it's no surprise their graduation rate went down by 11 percentage points. But if you compare that with a school, one of those schools, those 5 schools where their graduation rate went up, which is School Without Walls, their attendance rate, while not fantastic when you understand what an attendance rate should be, was 87.7%. Now, another point of comparison is if you compare these two schools, Vanguard and School Without Walls, and again, I leave it to the experts to assess whether my assessment is correct. But if you look at the pupil-staff ratio at Vanguard, it's 7.6 to 1. If you look at this School Without Walls, the data, our budget book tells us that the pupil-to-staff ratio is 6.8 to 1. Now, again, I didn't get my degree, well, I got my degree in education, but not certainly an advanced degree, and I don't do what you guys do. But I'm left wondering, do we look at the, budget's supposed to be a reflection of your priorities. Do we look at this budget as a reflection of our priorities? And if it is, what data do we use to indicate whether we are correctly prioritizing the schools that are in need? Now, I'm not saying this proves that Vanguard needs more staff people than School Without Walls. I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm suggesting is that there should be, at some point in the life of this assessment, a critical assessment of how this data relates to these 5 schools that went up and 5 schools that went down. And so I then began to ask, what is being done, and I don't need the answer today, what is being done administratively or from a personnel perspective to address these 5 schools that went down? And again, I'm not expecting the answer today, but this is what I think the expectation should be when we come out of this book. Not only with a balanced budget, but how do we deal with these challenges that are evident through the data points that are presented in our budget? And what is being done from, and again, I don't need to answer this question today, but what is being done from a resource perspective to address these, this data, the challenges that is reflected in this budget? And then the other question that I have is, who is charged with, I've conducted a very rudimentary, very basic, probably not too good, forensic examination of this data. But my question is, and it doesn't need to be answered now, and we can put it on a question log, who is charged with doing the forensic analysis of this data and the interrelationships between the data points that are here? Because some could argue that this data and the results suggest that we have, and I know our superintendent has said this and people before have said it, we have an inequitable distribution of resources. And one could conclude from my rudimentary analysis that that inequitable distribution of resources has resulted in inequitable results. One other point, and I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. The very rough assessment that I've just done suggests to me, and I'm not a researcher, but it suggests to me that in the next rendition of this budget book, we ought to even go deeper. Because, for example, if you look at it, one of the data points on the budget book is the number of English language learners, students with disabilities, students who are economically disadvantaged. We all see that there. But it doesn't say what percentage of their population. It says what numbers there are, but it doesn't say what percentage of that student population. So there may be a school, let's just say, Vanguard may, and I'm not saying this is true, but hypothetically, Vanguard may have a disproportionate number of students that cause its data points on graduation rate, for example, to suffer. Again, I'm not asking for any answers to these questions today, but I think if we walk away from this book thinking, okay, and I know nobody here would do that, we've balanced the budget. We've done it. And that's how I began my comments. That is real progress, and we're very happy that it happened. But if that's all we do, and we don't use this data to assess where we're at and where we're going, I think our challenge will be more difficult next year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I would like to respond to that, because the aggregate numbers, when you go back and look at the proportion, ratio, and percents with regard to an average student funding formula, is one methodology that one can use to apply resourcing from a district office to schools. But this year what we did was we worked with every principal, and the chiefs and the senior team looked at every student by face and name, looked specifically at the needs of the individual learners, the data points that are collected at 5-week intervals, and attempted to make some customized decisions. While we could work out a formula and are happy to do that and model that out and show the models of that, this budget is an attempt to equalize what students need in order to meet grade level performance, credit proficiency, and graduation rates. And what you're seeing is, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, because the budget book really does not do justice to the movement and reorganization of some of the programs. So while we've said that we're not reducing services, we are in fact going to make significant and substantive changes to some of the programs and the way we deliver those services. And if you go back to the 100-day plans with the improvements in our data systems, our real-time data, and our capacity to be able to use resources flexibly and fluidly in a moving organization, what I hope we're able to do is to demonstrate how these resources, while they're fixed in this moment, we intend to move around at 5-week intervals in the year to come. So we're in the process right now of working through how do you give a snapshot in time, but also represent the movement or the flexibility that we need to move resources where they're needed during the year, and stop this process of looking at school assignment, staff assignment, and student assignment as an annual event, but more as a fluid and flexible event. So again, this is a design challenge to those that are able to represent a moving organization in process or in progress. And I think President White, there probably are better ways for us to communicate the data, and we'll look to get some support and communications to do that. So thank you for the opportunity, though, to express the level of detail that went into this budget.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out, you answered my question, and I appreciate that response. In other words, what they say in my business is it's a living, breathing document. More importantly, it's an environment that you understand you have to adapt to change it. It's not this static thing that we see here. So that answered my question. Who's going to do the forensic? Who's going to look at the data? So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. That'll work. Thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of our third budget deliberation. Again, we want to take time to thank the staff, our staff, for doing the great work. Superintendent, we want to thank your staff for doing the great work and pulling this. This is not a very easy time in our district, but I think the good thing is that I think over the last number of years, I think you'll all agree with me, it has become a much more smoother process. We can tell you that from experience, 7 or 8 years ago, it was not smooth. It was contentious. It got loud. We were laying hundreds of people off and then bringing them back 60 days later and all those things. And over the last number of years, we've not seen that. I think we've had some stability with regard to our staff as a result of that. And I think our staff really appreciates that they weren't laid off in June and then called back 10 days before school started. So we don't see that as much. So I want to thank everybody. And so our next meeting is, again, thank you and your staff for doing that. So our next meeting is our full school board meeting, which is next Thursday.
Mr. Chairman, someone having a really good idea. You know, we've been collecting ties, and bless you, and we've been doing it at quite a clip, no pun intended. But gentlemen, and you ladies who sometimes wear ties, that does happen. Ray, I'm going to call you out, Ray. Ray had a good idea. He suggested that you come to, it's obviously voluntary, come to the meeting a Thursday with your tie, and at a certain point in time, you untie your tie and you give it up. I think we've collected, I don't know what the number is, but it's an amazing number of ties that we've collected. And they will be going to Leadership Academy, and Baden doesn't know this yet, but Baden as well. So if your husband has a tie and you can sneak one away from him, steal that. I said that on the record. But gentlemen, please, this, you know, we don't often walk around this building without ties. This is an opportunity for you to, is that all right, Superintendent Dean Williams? So bring your ties and take them off on Thursday night. Thanks a lot.
So one more thing, I just wanted to put this out. I had sent out an email, this doesn't have to do with finance, about another meeting around the EPO Geneseo. Is there going to be another one planned around that before the business meeting? I think it's really important for us to discuss that.
What I said to the superintendent was there was an outstanding, let me back up a little bit, the EPO, Anju Sika, the dean of the education school at SUNY Geneseo, has responded to a number of questions, answered every question put before her. There was an issue that was raised very recently within the last, I became aware of it within the last week. I immediately sent an email to the superintendent. I suggested that the superintendent and her staff talk to Anju Sika, the dean, because all this planning, just like with the EPO at East High School, all this planning is done by the principals, and then they bring whatever resolution they can come up with to the board. So I've asked this additional issue that has come up, I've asked the superintendent and her staff and the staff at Geneseo to talk about that issue, because the SUNY Geneseo had not had a chance to respond to that issue.
I meant getting advisement from our superintendent and the cabinet around their thoughts around this EPO.
What I'm saying is, what I have asked, what I've told the superintendent to do is continue her dialogue with the dean of the education school at SUNY Geneseo. Once that dialogue is completed, then they bring their collective presentation to the full board. That's what I'm saying. This issue that came up, the dean of SUNY Geneseo did not have an opportunity to respond to it. So I would not want, to be honest, I would not want the president of SUNY Geneseo to be ambushed by information that she had not been aware of. So I have asked them to bring this information to the attention of SUNY Geneseo, have them talk about it offline, which is what we always have done. They can do that, and then bring that information, whatever that information is, before the full board, because we're the body that makes that decision.
Right, but aren't we making a decision this
No,
business
we're
meeting?
not.
Okay. If that's the case, then that's good. I thought we needed to decide by April 27th.
I don't know if you noticed, but we got a notice, everybody got a notice that the meeting for tonight, which is supposed to be on this, was canceled.
Okay.
That email was sent to everybody. So
as long as we're not deciding on business meeting next week, then I'm good.
No, well, it would be this week.
Well, it's this week. That's
Absolutely
right,
not.
it's this week, okay.
So that directive been sent to the superintendent. She's going to meet with her senior cabinet. Okay. They're going to talk about it. Again, my thought was it wasn't something that you would say to the president of SUNY Geneseo, hey, listen, there's this last-minute issue that you haven't even had a chance to talk about. That wouldn't be fair, right? So they're talking about it, and they'll bring it back to the board.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we stand.
Thank you.
I emailed you that. That it was
Yeah, it's a...
Yeah, I emailed you, Deb, and then, did you confirm